The soft hum of the airplane cabin. A slap rings out clearly. Everyone freezes. Silence fills the first-class cabin. She slapped him, a black man sitting quietly in seat 2C right in front of everyone. Unknowingly, not imagining that he was the CEO of the airline she worked for. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at her. Calm, steady. A look that made the entire cabin fall silent. Not out of fear, but because they realized they had just witnessed something bigger than a mere altercation. It wasn't just a slap. It was millions of smaller slaps in the form of looks, words, prejudices that people have learned to endure in silence. But this time, silence came to an end. In this video, you will follow a real-life story deeply recreated about prejudice, kindness, and how one man without raising his voice can change an entire system. If you've ever been treated differently because of your appearance, your background, or something you cannot change, then this story is for you. Don't forget to share. If this story touches you, and subscribe to the channel to never miss true stories, emotional lessons about kindness, justice, and humanity. Now let's begin. She mocked him, ignored him throughout the service process, and then slapped him in front of everyone, unaware that the black man quietly sitting in seat 2C was actually the CEO of the airline. "Excuse me, could you give me a hand?" Derrick Thompson stood beneath the overhead compartment, holding a dark blue duffel bag. His voice was calm and polite. He didn't look like someone who needed help, but after 3 back-to-back meetings and a stressful layover at Evergreen Field Airport, his left shoulder had gone numb. It wasn't a big deal, just a simple request. The flight attendant, a slender woman with high cheekbones and tightly tied blonde hair, glanced at him. Her name tag read, Hannah. She didn't smile, didn't even stop. Her eyes scanned Derrick from head to toe with an unspoken message that carried more weight than any words. "People like you always want something." She muttered, not quietly enough for the passenger in 2A to hear and turn around. Derrick blinked, not out of surprise. At 65, he was far too accustomed to moments like this. He looked like someone you might run into at a quiet cafe. A well-fitted gray sweater, neatly pressed khakis, metal-rimmed glasses, and hair trimmed short with a few silver strands. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just calm. But behind that gaze was a man who had once flown fighter jets in the Air Force, dined with mayors, slept in freezing cold airplane hangars, and had worked through every position in the airline industry over the past 4 decades. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to observe. Hannah rolled her eyes and walked away without touching the bag. Derrick tried again, lifting the bag and stowing it in the overhead compartment himself. A man across the aisle glanced at him, offering a brief look of sympathy, but saying nothing. The engines roared. The plane was preparing for takeoff. Derrick sat down in seat 2C by the window. Silent, he placed his hands on his thighs, exhaled lightly, his gaze directed out the window as the runway slipped by. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was observing. Measuring Hannah returned to demonstrate the safety procedures. She passed Derrick's row without making eye contact, without acknowledging his presence. When she reached the emergency exit row, she beamed at a man in a sports jacket, joking loudly enough for everyone around to hear. "Oh no, I don't need to brief you. You've got everything under control." She laughed loudly. Derrick's jaw twitched just slightly, but enough. The plane reached cruising altitude. The service trolley began rolling. Derrick was reading an article about the frequent flyer program in Fast Weekly when he realized she had ignored him again. "Excuse me, could I have a black coffee?" he asked, still calm. Hannah looked at him as if he had asked her to give him a foot massage. "Sir, we are very busy. I will serve you when I can." She snapped, then poured blueberry juice for the man sitting next to Derrick. The man, a balding programmer from Redbridge based on the stickers on his laptop, glanced down awkwardly, adjusting his seatbelt. He didn't want to get involved. Derrick nodded slightly, going back to his magazine, but he wasn't really reading it, not truly. His mind was analyzing, not just because of the insult, but because of the silence. The way people avoided his gaze. How this always happened. Quietly, publicly, frighteningly familiar. He looked at the back of the seat in front of him, the airline's logo facing him. His airline. His name wasn't printed on anything yet. Not yet, but it would be soon. Just last month he was appointed as the new CEO of SkyConnect Airlines, with plans to silently inspect the service nationwide. No press, no fanfare, just real-world experiences from someone within the industry. This was his first flight, and everything had gone wrong from the start. But Derrick wasn't shaken. He observed. He listened. He waited. By the time the plane crossed Clearwater's airspace, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had changed not dramatically, but enough for him to feel it. Not because of turbulence or humidity, but because of the way she kept avoiding his row as though it were cursed. He sat still, listening to the hum of the engines, the gentle clink of glasses from the galley ahead. Hannah was now chatting animatedly with a couple in seats 1A and 1B about her dog and some reality TV show. Her voice was warm, her energy engaging. But when she turned back, her face went cold as though she had just removed a mask. She approached Derrick not to serve him, but to ask the man sitting behind him. "Mr. Carlton, would you like anything else?" Her voice was sweet, slightly leaning down. Derrick turned his head slightly. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but it was hard not to hear. "I'll take a whiskey if you have it," Mr. Carlton replied. Hannah laughed. "Of course, for you, anything." She turned away, walking past Derrick, then stopped, finally making eye contact with him. "Still waiting for that coffee?" she asked loudly. Not a hint of kindness nor friendliness. "Just making sure you're not planning on filing a complaint about being discriminated against in first class." Derrick lifted his head, his voice still calm. "I'm not complaining. I just want a cup of coffee." His calmness bothered her more than if he had shouted. Hannah forced a smile and then walked off without saying anything further. The man in 3A leaned forward, softly speaking, and that was uncalled for. Derrick turned to look at him, nodding slightly in gratitude, but not responding. He had learned long ago that if you're the only one speaking up, you're quickly labeled as the problem. And he continued to wait, because he knew this was just the beginning. People often forget that they are being watched. Derrick Thompson lifted his head, his gaze quietly scanning the faces around him. Some people looked his way, but most pretended not to see anything. There was something very strange about this collective silence, like an unspoken agreement. Everyone saw it, but no one wanted to step in. No one wanted to be the one to say what everyone already knew. About 10 minutes later, Hannah returned. She held a small paper cup of coffee, as if even touching it was a bother. "Here's your coffee," she said awkwardly, leaning over him, spilling a few drops onto the tray in front of Derrick. "I hope it's strong enough for you." Derrick didn't respond. Then the real blow came. "I didn't mean to offend." She continued, her voice louder, this time clearly meant for the people around them to hear. "But you don't exactly seem like the kind of passenger we get in this section. Are you sure you're sitting in the right seat?" The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Even the man in 1B stopped typing, his hands hovering in midair. A few people turned around to look. Derrick looked up, his gaze not angry but direct, sharp. So what kind of person do you usually meet here?" Hannah froze, confused, then shifted into defensive mode. "Businessmen, CEOs. Not, I mean, sometimes people think they can upgrade or lie about their seat. My ticket is not fake." Derrick replied. "You can check any time." "I already checked," she snapped quickly, her voice growing colder. "I just wanted to make sure no one was getting special treatment." Her words were simple, but Derrick understood the implication, and he could see it on her face. She wasn't used to seeing people like him in a place like this. And the more he stayed calm, the more unsettled she became, losing control. Derrick leaned back in his seat, letting her finish. He didn't need to defend himself, because what she didn't know and what he wasn't ready to reveal would change everything. But just as he thought the matter was settling down, he sensed something she wasn't finished yet. And whatever was left in her, he was about to witness it. The plane began descending, flying over the rugged mountains near Stone Valley. The flight attendants started their final checks. Passengers sat quietly, drifting into a sleepy state in preparation for landing. But Derrick felt something building. Not the pressure in the cabin, but the feeling. The way Hannah kept glancing toward him, not obviously just quick glances, as if she was looking for an excuse. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Not because he was tired, but because he was calculating. He had hoped this flight would help him understand how staff treated regular passengers. But what he had received felt like a performance. And now the performance was turning hostile. Hannah passed by again, collecting empty cups and napkins. When she reached Derrick's row, he gently handed her the used cup and napkin. She looked at them as though he had handed her trash from the street. "I'm not your servant," she snapped. A woman in 1A heard and gasped so loudly it was unmistakable. No one spoke, but all eyes turned toward them. Derrick blinked. That same look, no anger, but this time something had shifted in his posture. He placed the cup and napkin neatly on the edge of the table, then looked directly at Hannah for the first time since the flight began. "I think that's your job. Flight attendant, serving passengers." He spoke in a steady tone, not loud, but as sharp as a scalpel. Hannah turned red from her neck to her cheeks. She hadn't expected that she had been waiting for an outburst or passive silence, but those slow, composed words cornered her. "I don't like your tone," she hissed. "I've never raised my voice." "I don't care who you think you are," she shouted, her voice rising. "What do you mean by people like you?" Derrick tilted his head, asking gently, and that was the moment everything shattered. Before she could finish her sentence, Hannah swung her hand a quick and hard slap, her open palm sweeping across Derrick's left cheek. The sound rang out not loud, but enough for all the passengers from row 1 to row 5 to stop. The man in 2A sprang from his seat. A woman in row 3 screamed, causing the person next to her to jump. A phone was already out recording the entire scene. Hannah stood frozen, her eyes wide. Her hand still hovered in the air before slowly dropping. Her face went from anger to panic. Derrick didn't move. He didn't touch his cheek. He just stared at her, his gaze calm, almost terrifying. And in that moment she began to realize she had gone too far. Passengers began murmuring. Many people stood up. A younger flight attendant, curly hair, calm face, rushed over from behind. "What the hell just happened?" she whispered, pulling Hannah aside. Hannah tried to speak, her voice hoarse. He was rude." Derrick stood slowly. He adjusted his sleeves, turning toward the crowd behind him. A man filming yelled, "Did anyone see that?" She slapped him right in the face. The younger flight attendant stepped forward, blocking them. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," Derrick said, taking a tissue to wipe the trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth. Hannah was now pale, as if all the blood had drained from her body. She opened her mouth to speak, but the younger flight attendant cut her off. "Back to the galley now." Hannah stood still. "I said go." The other flight attendant snapped. Finally, Hannah turned and walked away. Her shoulders, stiff arms tensed. Derrick slowly sat back down, the eyes of everyone still on him. A passenger leaned close, whispering, "Sir, do you want to file a complaint?" Derrick didn't look at the person immediately. He looked ahead, then glanced briefly at the headrest where the SkyConnect Airlines logo quietly appeared. "No," he said, "but this won't be forgotten." Someone finally recognized him, and the truth whispered so quietly shifted the entire atmosphere of the flight. The voice came from seat 5. A woman in her early 30s wearing a dark gray suit, reading glasses perched on her nose, leaned over to the man next to her and whispered, "That's Derrick Thompson." The man looked up, frowning. She stared at him, amazed. Derrick Thompson. He was just announced as the new CEO of SkyConnect Airlines. Last month, I saw it on LinkedIn. He's a former Air Force pilot. Been in the industry for decades. He's not your typical passenger. And like a spark on dry grass, the news spread from row to row, quickly, faster than the plane was descending toward Elmsworth Bay. Several passengers hurried to pull out their phones, searching for the name just mentioned. And there, on SkyConnect's official website, was the familiar photo, the man sitting in seat 2C, glasses, a calm face. Definitely him. No mistaking it. Whispers spread across the cabin, blending shock, confusion, and regret. The man in seat 1B stood up and turned to Derrick. "Sir," he said, his voice low, clearly trying to remain calm. "Is that true?" Derrick didn't answer right away. He kept his gaze forward, his face calm, unmoving like a rock in the stream. But when he slowly turned to look at the man, he simply nodded slightly. "Yes, it's me." The silence that followed was thick, not heavy but profound. Even the captain's voice coming through the cabin speakers seemed to carry more weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Elmsworth International Airport. Flight crew, please prepare for landing." Hannah still hadn't returned to the cabin. She hid in the back galley, perhaps crying, perhaps trying to piece together what had shattered so quickly. Meanwhile, the younger flight attendant, with dark curly hair and a name tag that read, "Lena," approached row 2C. She leaned slightly forward, her voice trembling, but sincere. "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were—" Derrick raised his hand gently to stop her. "It's okay. The important thing is that you treated me kindly before you knew who I was. That's enough." Lena's cheeks turned red. She bit her lip and nodded slightly. "We will report what happened today." Derrick looked her directly in the eyes. "Don't report it because I'm the CEO. Report it because it was wrong." Across the aisle, phones were still filming, but now the looks from passengers were no longer curious. They had become responsible witnesses. And the story was no longer about a CEO. It was about how quickly power could shift just because of a name. A man sitting at the back of the cabin shouted, "We stand with you, Mr. Thompson. The way she treated you was unacceptable." And like a dam breaking, others began to speak up. She ignored him the entire flight. She served me first and then skipped over him. I heard her say, "People like him." There's no mistaking that. It wasn't a mob of angry people. It wasn't a witch hunt. It was simply the truth long suppressed finally spilling out. Derrick still didn't stand up. He remained seated quietly, present. No dramatic gestures, no impassioned speeches, just the presence of someone who knew who they were and didn't need to yell to be heard. The plane touched down smoothly, but no one hurried to unbuckle their seatbelts. They stayed not because of the rules, but out of respect. As the plane taxied to the gate, Hannah finally appeared again. Her face was pale, no longer carrying any confidence or arrogance. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. She stood still, frozen. The cabin door opened. Waiting outside were 2 SkyConnect supervisors and a security officer. Lena stepped forward, spoke quickly to them, pointing toward the cabin, and then subtly gesturing toward Derrick. He stood up and walked down the aisle. When he passed Hannah, he stopped and looked her directly in the eyes. "I'm not going to make a big deal out of this," he said quietly, but loud enough for her to hear. "But this won't be forgotten. Not just by me. The company will know." She nodded slowly. Her gaze now seemed to begin to grasp just a fraction of the consequences she had created for herself. But the real storm didn't begin at the airplane door. It started when the story left the cabin and spread across social media, where silence was no longer an option. When Derrick left the plane, everything changed. Two people in Sky Connect, Navy uniforms, approached the jet bridge. A black man in his 40s, name tag, reading Marcus Green, spoke first. "Thompson, we were informed about the incident midway through the flight. I'm Marcus, the Regional Operations Director. Allow me to offer our deepest apologies for what happened." Derrick didn't show any emotion. "I didn't come here to hear an apology. Marcus, I came here to see accountability." The second supervisor, a white woman in her late 50s named Eliza, nodded quickly. "We've isolated all flight data and flagged the incident for internal investigation. The flight attendant has been suspended pending the investigation." "Make sure it's a real investigation," Derrick responded, his voice low. "Don't let it become a public relations campaign." Eliza tightened her jaw slightly but maintained a professional tone. "Understood, sir. Derrick wasn't here to micromanage. He didn't need to control everything from the corporate office, but he would be watching the entire process from the front lines." At the baggage claim, Derrick retrieved his suitcase. No bodyguards, no media team. Just him and his phone, which buzzed incessantly in his pocket. In less than an hour after the plane landed, the video from the flight had gone viral. One clip surpassed 2 million views in just a few minutes. The headline was simple, but it didn't need much more. "Flight attendant slaps black passenger in first class." Unaware. He's the CEO of the airline. The comments exploded like fireworks. Some praised Derrick Thompson for his unnerving calm. Others were furious, calling Hannah the symbol of everything that was wrong with modern service industries. And as usual, a small but loud group appeared, doubting it all. Staged fake. Trying to get attention. But Derrick didn't mind. He knew the truth, and more than anyone else, he knew that people would believe what they wanted to believe. But there was one undeniable thing: that moment was too public to be ignored. For years, Sky Connect Airlines had built its reputation as a progressive, inclusive airline, always striving for improvement. But now they were facing a real media storm. When Derrick arrived at the hotel in downtown Cedarbrook, he had already received a slew of messages from 3 national news channels, 2 prominent podcasts, and a top talk show host. But he didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, he called a closed-door meeting with the Sky Connect Ethics Committee. No PR reps, no lawyers. Just the people truly responsible for policy training and corporate culture. As the Zoom meeting began, the atmosphere was heavy, as though everyone was holding their breath. Isabel, a Latin woman in her 60s from the HR department, was the first to speak. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know what to say. I watched the video. It broke me." Derrick remained calm. He didn't frown or nod, just spoke softly. "Then we must fix what has been broken. Not with statements, but with systems. No anger, no speeches. Just clear, rational analysis. How the unconscious bias training programs had become mere formalities. How too many complaints had failed to reach the right ears. How frontline employees were maintaining harmful habits in a rotting corporate culture. And how the silence, in first class, the silence of those with privilege, was the most dangerous thing of all. The slap didn't hurt me," Derrick said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "I've taken worse hits when I was flying combat missions. What hurt me was watching 20 people sitting there, watching someone get humiliated, and not one of them had the courage to speak up." Then he exhaled softly. "I don't blame them. I blame us for creating a system where silence is the safest way to live." There was a pause. Then someone clearly struggling with their emotions spoke up. "We'll get to work immediately." It was Isabel. Derrick ended the call without ceremony. Meanwhile, at the airport, Hannah was being escorted through a staff-only hallway. Her face was pale. Her name tag had been removed. A senior HR manager informed her that she had been suspended until further notice. Hannah didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just walked slowly, like someone who had just crossed through a nightmare. She hadn't yet realized she wasn't thinking about Derrick Thompson. She was thinking about the video, the comments, how everything she had built had crumbled in a single day. Not because of one action, but because of a long chain of wrong habits that had finally found their reckoning. While Hannah's story ended at the airport, another story was beginning to spread, starting from living rooms to boardrooms to airports across the country. By the next morning, Derrick Thompson's name was all over the headlines. The titles were direct. CEO slapped by flight attendant on flight attendant. Suspended after incident with airline CEO, black CEO. Mistaken for a ticketless passenger, shocking truth revealed. But in all of those headlines, none of them really touched what mattered most to Derrick, because he wasn't seeking outrage, nor did he want revenge. What kept him awake that night at the hotel wasn't the slap. It was what it represented. Millions of silent moments disregarded and worse accepted as normal. A veteran reporter from the Cedarbrook Times finally called. His voice was steady, polite, as he asked Mr. Thompson, "Are you willing to share what happened?" Derrick stayed silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "Yes. But I won't talk about myself. I'll talk about those who endure this every day, without cameras watching and without a title to protect them." They met in a small cafe. No media crew, no camera lights, just a quiet corner table and a soft-spoken story, yet one full of weight. The article aired that evening, not as a scandal, but as a challenge. When titles no longer shield you, a CEO speaks about silence in the skies. In the piece, Derrick shared about his childhood in Milton, where his mother used to tell him, "People see you before you even step in. Don't give them a reason to criticize you more." He spoke about the nights spent in airplane hangars, the combat missions, and the times he had to sit quietly in meetings where no one thought he was the boss. And then he said the words that made the whole article tremble. "If I, a CEO, can be seen as undeserving of a seat in first class, what are those without titles going through?" Some people said everything was happening too fast. Too much was changing. But Derrick Thompson looked them squarely in the eye and asked fast compared to what? Compared to the pace of disrespect. Meanwhile, Hannah's image had become a symbol, but a symbol of something negative. Her name flooded social media, trending for all the wrong reasons. Even an old video from 2 years ago was suddenly dug up, where she was caught berating a young Latin boy traveling alone. The pieces started to connect. People realized this wasn't just one slip-up, it was part of a pattern of behavior. Her firing decision was made quietly. Derrick didn't issue a public statement. He didn't need to, because the things he needed to say, he had already said through his actions, through his presence, through his timely silence. A few days later, at an aviation industry conference held in Brightmoor, Derrick stood on stage in front of hundreds of executives, experts, and leaders from major and minor airlines. Everyone expected a speech filled with strategy numbers and futuristic vision, but instead he told a story. The story of Flight 1627 from Arlington to Elmsworth. Of the cold stares of the service requests being ignored, of the slap that came from prejudice, not because of what he did, but because of what others thought he was. Then he said softly, like a whisper with weight, "I didn't want to be seen as a CEO on that flight. I just wanted to be seen as a man with a ticket, a tired body after a long journey, a man who deserves respect." He paused for a moment, his eyes sweeping across the room. If we can't ensure that for every person boarding a plane, then we've failed at the most fundamental principle of this industry, humanity. The conference room fell silent. Not an awkward silence, but the silence of awakening. And then the applause began. Not rapid, not loud, but slow, deep, like a wake-up call. After the speech, as Derrick stepped out of the conference hall, a young employee, a black woman with a bright smile, approached him, hesitantly. "Mr. Thompson, I saw that video. The way you handled everything, it gave me hope." Derrick smiled, saying little. "Thank you. Now open that door for the next person, because sometimes justice doesn't need to be loud. It's just quiet changes that touch the hearts of people." Long after the headlines have faded, 2 weeks passed. The public's attention slowly cooled, like every media storm. Social media shifted toward newer, flashier, louder topics. But for Derrick, that silence wasn't relief, it was a reminder. He didn't want this to become a sensational headline and then fade away. He didn't want people to only remember the slap, then forget the conversation. So he returned to SkyConnect's headquarters in Ridgepoint, the old concrete building that hadn't changed since the early 2000s. No red carpets, no media. Just Derrick walking in through the back door, where many years ago he had walked as a junior analyst. A few employees glanced through the glass panels, not because they feared him, but because of respect, and maybe because of a quiet hope that finally there was a leader who wouldn't stay silent when it was time to speak up. In his office, Derrick opened a yellow file folder. Inside were nearly 200 printed emails from customers, from employees, from people who had worked here and left. Some letters were just a few lines, some were pages long. One woman who had worked at a regional airport for 22 years wrote that she had been passed over for 5 promotions, despite being the main trainer for the men who were chosen instead of her, a retired flight attendant, shared that she had been disciplined for speaking out about colleagues mocking passengers with different accents. Letters came from every role, pilots, gate agents, janitors, from every city, from every race. But the common thread was clear, being disregarded with no one listening. Derrick closed the file. He sat quietly in his office. He knew what came next. The following Monday morning, SkyConnect launched a new initiative, the Listening Line. It wasn't a complaint hotline. It was a bridge open 24/7, anonymous or not allowing every employee wherever they were to share, and know that their words wouldn't fall into a void. Some mocked it, calling it just another PR stunt. But Derrick didn't care, because this wasn't a stunt. It was a commitment. No one would ever have to sit in seat 2C alone again. At the same time, Hannah's lawyer issued a short statement. She deeply regretted what had happened and was seeking support to address potential stress and behavioral issues. Derrick read it once. Didn't respond publicly. Instead, he sent an internal memo with just one sentence. Dignity does not come from titles. Dignity is a basic human right, and that is the culture we are building here. That weekend, he visited a SkyConnect training center in Clearwater unannounced. He personally shook hands with every employee, then quietly sat at the back of a customer service training session. At the end of the class, he asked to share a few words. I know sometimes we pretend these things don't exist, that prejudice isn't real, that everyone's too busy to notice. But I sat in that seat, and if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. He didn't blame. He didn't lecture. He spoke like someone who had carried luggage, written procedures, flown planes, and had known the feeling of shame, even though he did nothing wrong. Later at the coffee machine, a young employee named Jasmine approached him, her voice soft as a breeze. Did you ever think about leaving it all behind? After that, Derrick smiled lightly. Yes, I did. But then I remembered change. only comes when we have the courage to sit back in the room that once caused us pain. That night he left Clearwater with just a small suitcase and a clearer feeling than ever. He hadn't changed everything, but he had started somewhere in the skies, over Arizona. Derrick Thompson rested his head against the airplane window, his gaze quietly following the soft drifting clouds. He closed his eyes for the first time since everything began. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. A breath no longer heavy, no anger, no strain from his role. He hadn't fixed everything. He couldn't, not yet. But he had started, and maybe just one beginning was enough for hope to start spreading. Stories like Derrick's are not meant to be skimmed over and forgotten. They exist to name the things we're accepting, to name the things we've silently ignored, and to name the courage we need when there are no cameras to catch the moment. If this story made you pause for a moment, made you think a little deeper, or stirred something within your heart, share it, because maybe someone out there needs to hear this right now. And don't forget subscribe to stay connected with real stories that touch people, stories that challenge how we treat each other and remind us of the things we truly stand for when no one else will. When Derrick Thompson closed his eyes on the flight back thousands of meters above the Arizona sky, he finally took a breath no longer weighed down by anger, injustice, or the pressure of a title. Not because he had fixed everything, but because he had begun. In a world where many choose silence for safety, he chose to stay in the room full of cracks and repair it from within. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't yell at the camera. He just sat there quietly, steadfast and determined. And that shook an entire system. This isn't just the story of a CEO being slapped on a flight. This is the story of human dignity, of the right to be respected, no matter what seat you sit and what title you carry, and the power of calmness in the face of injustice. If you're hearing this and have ever felt overlooked, ignored, or unheard, remember you are not alone. And if you've never experienced that, this story is a reminder that be the one who stands up when no one else dares to. Let's help this story continue to live in people's hearts. With a like, if you found it meaningful, a share to spread awareness and compassion, and a subscribe. So we meet again in the next stories where kindness is never a weakness, but the strongest action you can choose every day. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not staying silent. See you in the next story.